In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 tips to help improve your wildlife portrait compositions. Now, this video is going to be specifically focused on wildlife portraits. It's not going to focus on environmental wildlife photos or any other compositional style that you might apply to wildlife photography. It's going to be specifically focused on how to perfect the wildlife portrait. And it's something that's very hard to do. You'll notice in a lot of the photos that I'm even using in this video, there are some flaws where I missed something that I should have had to make the wildlife portrait just a little bit better. But overall, this is just going to cover what I think you need to put into a photo and what all needs to line up for you to get that perfect portrait that you're looking for. So let's jump straight into it with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is to find the simplest environment that you possibly can to put your animal in. You want to find an environment that is generally uniform and doesn't have too many sticks or rocks or distractions in it, and that will allow for the background to blur out and really put the focus on the animal in the frame. And to showcase this, I have a few sample photos here. And this first one that you see here is a grizzly cub that I photographed in Yellowstone National Park. And as you can see, this is a very, very messy environment. You've got logs cutting all through the frame, sticking into corners. You've got this sticking in over here. All these sticks back here in the background, and all these different little things that stick into the frame that are really distracting and pull your eye away from the animal. Not to mention that these logs that are behind the bear cub here are not that far back, so there wasn't too much background blur, meaning that the focus isn't really on that bear. It's, your eye can go straight past that bear and focus on some of the detail in these logs back here, as opposed to if this background was all blown out and blurred out, then your eye would stick to this bear. And this environment is just very messy, and it ends up pulling your eye away from the bear and onto all this other stuff around the bear, and that's really not what you want for wildlife portraits. For portraits, you want the viewer's eye to go straight to the animal. And another good example of this would even be this prairie dog photo from Badlands. In this photo, I've got a really nice and uniform background back here, but right here behind the prairie dog, I've got this stick that sticks into the frame and really just pulls away from the animal. When you're looking at this image, that's a big distraction back here. And you might not think it's that big of a deal when you're shooting in the field, but when viewers look at the photo, that is going to pull their eye away, and that is going to distract from the animal. And so that's the kind of stuff that you want to take out of the image. You want to declutter and get that stuff out of the frame to create a simpler environment. So this is a pretty good example of what not to do when looking for a simple environment. But this photo right here of a great gray owl that I photographed in Yellowstone as well is a great example of what you should be looking for in a portrait. You've got a nice uniform background. This pattern back here is all just pine trees. It's not like in the bear photo here, you have all kinds of different colors and textures and different things like that in the background that end up pulling the eye away. For this owl one, it's very simple and uniform, and the texture remains the same throughout the entirety of the background, and the background in this photo is far enough back that it allowed for a lot of background blur back there, and the focus stayed right up here on the owl. So this really allows the viewer's eye to go straight to that owl and then not bounce around, because you have a very simplified environment here that the owl is placed in the frame. And this is more what you're looking for when you talk about a simple environment for your photo. And here's a little bonus tip for you. If you want to simplify the environment even further and really push the viewer's eye in towards the subject, you can use natural framing like this. As you can see here, I have shot between 2 pine trees that were very close together here and kind of placed the owl in between those 2 pine trees. And it's created this very simple and soft natural framing around the owl that blocks out any distractions that might have been on the edges here that would pull your eye away, and instead sends your eye straight past this soft green color right on into the owl. And while natural framing is not something that I think is 100% essential to the perfect wildlife portrait, I do think it's something that you should use as a tool to help simplify your environment and to help create that better portrait if you see the opportunity to do so. Now, moving on, tip number 2 is going to be look for contrasting colors in the background that help the animal to pop in the image. This tip is pretty self-explanatory. Really, the best way to show it is through showing you some examples. So taking a look at this photo here, this prairie dog is kind of a tan / white / brown color. And as you can also see, his background is the exact same color. And this is not what you want at all, because what happens when you take a photo like this and you have a background that is the exact same color is your animal just kind of blends into its surroundings. Even though the background is totally blown out and blurred out, which, kind of speaking to tip number 1, is exactly what you want, because he's not a different color, he still just kind of blends in with the background and really doesn't pop out of the frame, which is what you're wanting in wildlife portraits. You want your viewer's eye to go straight to that animal and for the animal to be the only focus of the image. And a great example that showcases what you really are looking for in regards to this tip is this photo right here of these mountain goats that I photographed just outside of Yellowstone. As you can see in this image, you have 2 white goats that are against this blue background, and because the background is that contrasting color, the goats really pop out of the frame, and the viewer's eye goes directly to them, and they don't really blend into their background. They really stand out in the image and are the main focus of the image without any distraction or blending in of the surroundings. Another great example would be this owl photo that I showed you in regards to the first tip, where you've got this nice gray owl on this dark green background that really helps that owl to pop out in the frame as well. Now the third tip is going to be giving your animal room to move in the frame, and this is something that I've talked about before in videos, and the reason I bring it up again is because it is a very, very important component of composition, and one that I see especially a lot of beginners getting wrong. And basically what this means is you don't want to fill the entire frame with the animal. You want to have the animal offset to one side of the frame and give the animal room to move into the other side of the frame in whichever direction the animal is looking. The best way to really show this is again with examples, and so you can see here I have a photo of a bison, and this is an example of what not to do. As you can see, this bison really has nowhere to go in the frame. He's moving in this direction, but there's no open space over here, so it just feels unnatural and the composition doesn't feel right when you look at it. If you take a look at this other bison photo that I also took in Hayden Valley, this composition feels a lot more natural, and the reason for that is because I've got the bison offset to this side of the frame. As you can see, his back end is right here, way closer to this edge than this other side of his body is to this edge. And so basically what I've done here is I've offset him to that side, and since he's kind of moving generally in this direction, I've left more space on this side. And by doing that, I've created that really natural feeling for this image where the composition just feels right, and it feels like the animal has a place to go in the image. Even though obviously it's a static image, he's not actually moving anywhere, by creating that space where the viewer's imagination is able to carry the animal through the frame, creates a more natural feeling and seamless composition that is going to be more appealing to the viewer's eye. So this is a really, really big tip, and one that I definitely recommend that if you're struggling with, you work on a lot, because this is one of the key components of composition in any style of photography, not just wildlife. And by mastering this, you're going to step up your compositions so much. Tip number 4 is going to be to look for a catchlight in the animal's eye. Now this might seem like a very small detail, but it actually has a huge impact on your images. And to showcase what I mean by this, we're going to take a look again at this goat photo from outside of Yellowstone. And you can see here that this baby goat here just kind of has a blacked out eye, no catchlight or anything, nothing to light that eye up. It's just the plain black eye with no detail there. But then if I zoom out and I look over here at the mother goat, you can see that the mother has this catchlight right up here in the top corner of the eye. And by having that catchlight in the eye, it's brought her to life so much more than the baby. And you can see when I zoom out, just by having a catchlight in the eye, even though it's a very small detail, you really bring the animals to life in your images. And viewers are going to notice if the catchlight isn't there. They might not be able to specifically pick out why the animal looks less lively in the image. They might not be able to pinpoint, that it is the fact that you're missing a catchlight, but they are going to notice something is off. And when the catchlight is there, it is going to have an impact on how they experience the photo. Tip number 5 is another really good one, and this one is to look for images where the wildlife has really good gesture or has a good pose in the frame. And basically what I'm talking about here is you want the legs and the head and everything to be positioned to where the animal looks natural and powerful in the image. And you haven't captured a moment where its legs are kind of in an awkward position or it's overlapping with another animal or anything like that. You want its stance and its position in the frame to have an impact on the viewer. And for it to do that, you have to look for good gesture in your images. So to showcase this, I have some examples here from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. When I went there last fall and photographed the elk rut, I took this image, and this image is not a good example of an animal having good gesture. Basically, what you can see here is that the elk is turned away from me. I can't even see his eye or anything like that. He's facing the wrong direction, and all of his legs are kind of overlapping here. So it just looks like he has two legs. One leg in the back and one leg in the front because they're overlapping like that. That's not what you want in your images. You want all four legs to show if it is a four-legged animal, and you want the animal to feel like it has a natural stance in the frame. And if you look back at this image, his stance just feels kind of awkward. It feels like I've caught him in between moments in this image, and he feels like just a two-dimensional object, and it doesn't work. But then if you take a look at another elk photo that I took that morning, in this photo, this animal has good gesture. And while this elk doesn't have perfect gesture in this photo, it is much better than the last one. Starting out, first of all, you can actually see his face and his eyes in this frame, so that's an immediate win. You want to be able to see at least one of the eyes in each image, and you can also see here that he's got a catchlight in this eye, which calls back to a previous tip. But besides that, you can see that the positioning on his legs is really great here. Obviously, he is turning in this direction. You can tell by the way that his head is kind of pointing in that direction to presumably walk this way. And as you can see when you look at his legs, he is raising this leg up. This one is down, and this one is on the way up, and that is really what you're looking for in gesture. That perfect moment where his leg is coming up and is perfectly in that right position. It doesn't feel like this previous photo where with this one it feels like I captured in between moments. With the better photo, it feels like I captured that moment because of his leg positioning up here. Now again, The gesture isn't perfect in this frame. You know, his back legs are still overlapping. It would be nice if maybe this leg right here was forward a little bit more, and then you could see all 4 legs. That would have been an even better gesture, because this still feels a little bit awkward in the way that both of his back legs are overlapping back here. But generally, this is a lot better than the previous one. And the main thing that I wanted to showcase here is the big difference in the gesture of these 2 images, and how much, by capturing that perfect moment where the animal is in the perfect position or stance or whatever you want to call it in the frame, you create a much more powerful wildlife portrait that is much more interesting to look at, and where the animal has a much bigger impact on the viewer when they look at the image. Then the 6th and final main tip is to look for balance in your wildlife photos. And this is one that I definitely struggle with a lot personally, and it definitely has bitten me in the butt sometimes, and is one that I'm really working on myself to improve in my wildlife photos. And basically what I mean by this is that, you know, I talked about earlier setting your wildlife off to one side of the frame, and by doing that, you're creating a space for the wildlife to move. But sometimes when you do that, you create an unbalanced image, and you know, it's too much weight and too much focus on one side of the frame because the wildlife's over there. And to fix this, you need to make sure that any other components of your image are on the other side of the frame. And to showcase what I'm talking about here, we're going to yet again take a look at this prairie dog photo. This is a great candidate for what had the potential to be a really good image, and I messed up a lot of things on, and it didn't turn into a really good image. But we're going to take a look at this one again, and you can see here that, yes, I've put the prairie dog more on this side of the frame, which has created space for him to move in the direction that he is looking. But because I have this green grass also on this side of the frame, and this stick also on this side of the frame, the image feels very weighted to this side, to the right side of the frame, and there's really nothing over here to balance it out. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, well, how do I fix this? If I'm placing the animal on one side of the frame, then isn't it always going to feel imbalanced? Not necessarily. There are really 2 ways to fix this. The first one is that you find the right environment that the animal is in. So for an example of this, I want to go back to this elk image here, and you can see in this frame that despite the fact that the elk is offset to this side of the image, it still feels balanced. And the reason for that is because I found an environment that is very uniform and is already naturally very balanced. So even though the elk is offset to this side, there's not any other distractions on this side of the frame, besides maybe you could say his breath over here, that are weighing it down on this side and making it feel imbalanced. The main issue, if we go back over to this prairie dog photo, is that all the other components of the frame, this nice splash of green up here and this little stick, are also on the same side of the frame as the prairie dog. So since those components are also over there, it feels imbalanced. But if you can find an environment that is free of any other components besides the animal, like this elk image, then you don't have to deal with that balance issue as much, because there's nothing weighing down this side of the frame besides the animal, at least to me. Some people might not like this. Maybe some people would want to have something over here to, you know, more balance it out. But for me, if the environment is simple enough, like in this image, then you don't need something on the other side that needs to balance it out. The only time that you're really going to need to balance the frame is when you have other components in the image that would lead to it being weighed down if they were all on this side of the frame, like in this prairie dog photo. So to show you an example of how you can fix this and actually balance out your photos when you have multiple components in the frame, we'll take a look at this black bear photo that I took in Great Smoky Mountains. Now you can see here that there are a lot of distractions in this frame with all these sticks that are in front of the bear. And I've placed the bear on this side of the frame so that, you know, he's looking in this direction, you know, kind of forward, but also in this direction. So I've given him space to move over there. But as you can see, much like the prairie dog photo, we have this tree coming in over here and these sticks right here in the front that, if I didn't have a way to balance this, the image would feel unbalanced to this side and would have too much weight on this side of the frame. But thankfully, in this scenario, I did have a way to balance it, and that was this stick over here and this stick right here. Despite that these are kind of distractions in the image, by having them on this side of the frame, it helped to balance the image out. So even though you have the bear and the tree trunk and all these sticks over here on this side, you have these sticking up over here that help balance the image out and make sure that, you know, it doesn't feel like all the weight is on this side of the frame. And this tip in particular is one that I find very hard to execute correctly, because this contradicts the tip that we've talked about earlier, such as decluttering your environment and finding the simplest environment possible, because you're purposely including distractions like this stick to balance out the image. You're not decluttering, you're including those things to balance the image more. And so it's really hard to figure out how you work with both of those and both declutter the environment enough to keep the focus on your animal, but also make sure that you're maintaining balance in the image. And the best way that I've found to do it is that, you know, if you have an environment that is totally free of distractions. For example, this owl photo right here, there are basically no distractions in this image. If you can find that environment, shoot it like that, declutter it as much as possible, and set your animal to one side of the frame, and it's still going to feel balanced because you have that nice simplified and uniform environment all the way around the animal. But if you can't find that environment and you have to shoot the image with a little bit of clutter in the frame because of the animal's position, then that's when you try to look for a way to use that clutter to balance out the image. And that would be the case with this black bear photo. In this situation, I couldn't move from this position because the rangers kind of had everything blocked off and you had to be in one certain area to view these bears. And this bear wasn't moving at all, so I basically had to shoot this frame with these sticks in the front and with this tree trunk sticking in over here. No matter what, I was going to have a lot of weight on this side of the frame because this stuff was here and because I couldn't move to kind of declutter and find a simpler environment. And so because of that, I just had to work with my environment and find a way to balance that out by including this other stick right over here on the other side. So really with this tip, it's all a matter of looking at your image and determining, okay, can I find the simplest environment possible where there's absolutely zero clutter in the image? If so, then you don't really have to worry too much about finding balance on one side or the other of the image. But if you can't do that, and you're shooting in a scenario with a lot of clutter right around the animal, then you need to find a way to use that clutter to create balance in the image. And that's basically how I go about doing it. So there you have it. Those are my 6 tips to creating the perfect wildlife portrait. Let me know what you guys think of these 6 tips down in the comments below. Did you find these helpful? Are these tips that you'll apply to your wildlife photography? Or do you have a totally different method and you disagree with some of these tips? Before I close this out, I do want to remind you guys to subscribe for the chance to win that trip to Alaska to photograph coastal brown bears when I hit 10,000 subscribers. Drop a like as well. That would really help the channel out. And with that, guys, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and have found it helpful and that you're able to apply it and improve your wildlife photography. That is all, guys. I will see you all in the next video.